So welcome everyone tonight. Thank you all for being here. We will start just by looking at our agenda here tonight and seeing what all we'll be talking about. So we just got done with welcome and introductions. Obviously now we're on agenda review, and we'll be doing some campaign review and going over some of the benefits of Final Five voting to make sure everyone's familiar with them. And we'll be talking about some of our work in November and then touching on 2022 elections. As well, we'll have some news at the end of the meeting about some projects and goals that Grow and Grow Action have coming up. So that's what we'll be doing here tonight. And we can go on to our next slide where we will talk about our strategic goal. So our goal with Bridge the Divide is to build relationships, promote civic engagement, and organize residents to demand that legislators pass Final Five voting in the Wisconsin legislature in 2023. And in doing that, we hope to reduce extreme partisanship and divisiveness in politics. And we can go on to our next slide, which is our geographic scope. So our project is focused on Assembly Districts 28, 29, 30, and 93. And those districts include counties, the counties of Pierce, St. Croix, Dunn, Polk, Eau Claire, and Pepin. And we're increasingly finding as time goes on that if we peak slightly outside of those assembly districts and into other districts or other counties in this Western Wisconsin area, that's completely okay with us as well. So if you're slightly outside of any of those districts, or you know someone who is wishing they could have a house party or something like that outside of those listed districts, we very well may still go if the opportunity presents itself. So thank you. We can go to the next slide. So this is our campaign timeline so far. We started with our kickoff in June 2022. We had 2 kickoff events in Menominee and River Falls in different parks in both towns. And then since then, we've been focusing on house parties and community events. So those have been our main way of building support for Final Five voting across Wisconsin. And then our ultimate goal is to put pressures on legislators in 2023 to pass Final Five voting in the state of Wisconsin. So I will hand it over to Bob to talk about some of our benefits that we see with Final Five voting.
Thank you, Danny. So this is a House Party team report. And I like to focus on benefits because if Final Five voting can be intricate and it helps to have done it a few times. And of course, once you've done it a few times, it becomes very simple and straightforward. But I lead with this because if there's one thing that you take away, I would urge you to pick just 1 or 2 of these benefits, whichever resonates most with you. Remember that. Actually practice saying it out loud. Final Five voting reduces toxic campaigns, or Final Five voting eliminates the spoiler effect. Practice saying it out loud so that when you do have conversations, when it comes up, you have something ready that you can go to, that you can rely on. You don't have to worry about going into deep explanations, just hitting 1 or 2 benefits. So I like to say, Final Five voting reduces toxic campaigns, gridlock, and the power of extremists. It eliminates the spoiler effect. It makes the November general election more important than any low turnout primary. It diffuses the effect of big money on politics. And it allows us to take the first step in improving elections and government. And you'll see I note there that some of these changes rely on changing incentives in order to change the behavior. Other of them change the structure so that the change is absolutely certain. We don't even have to rely on incentives. And of course, some of them are what I call softer changes. They're less certain, or they lead to future changes rather than delivering something right now. Next slide, please. So for our house party history, started slow with a couple of neighborhood house parties I had. And then Linda Vovoda Sadi was our first house party host probably in July. Ellen Oaks would have been our second, probably in August. And then each generation, you know, as we meet people at those house parties, we get more hosts, and so the generations of house parties expand, and that's how we expand our activity. So September was very good with 5, October with 7, November with 5, and then Linda and I have partnered on adding community ed classes, so adult community ed classes. We had one in Hudson in October, another in Hudson in October, and we've got more scheduled for the future. We treat those community ed as experiments. We don't know exactly what we're going to get. We don't have a host to draw in people, but still we want to continue doing this just in the hopes that we can reach out and make connections with people we wouldn't otherwise. There's probably a little bit of a lull in December for reasons I don't have to explain, as holiday parties get in the way of that a little bit. But I do see that ramping up in January, including 4 community ed classes that Linda procured for me. And then I'm still working with several people to schedule house parties from existing contacts we have. And there may even be some people on the call tonight that I owe a phone call to schedule house parties. Next slide, please. Oh, Janelle is asking, how has attendance been at the community ed classes? It is lower than we would have expected or than we would have wanted. We had a class of 2 and I think a class of 3. Good people interested there, and I've had a little bit of follow-up contact with one of the people at those parties. But you know, that was in Hudson. We'll find out whether River Falls is going to have a bigger turnout, whether Elmwood, the latest one we've got on there, what kind of turnout we're going to get there. And as I often say to people, we have had successful small parties and successful big parties. And success means we just get more party hosts to continue to enable us to propagate the message. I'll close with my answer to our most frequently asked question. What is Final 5 voting? And that's often paired with, is it instant runoff or is it ranked choice is often the question that I get. So I always describe it as Final 5 voting is a multi-party 5-winner primary election plus an instant runoff or ranked choice general election. You can almost think of it like a brand name. Final 5 voting is a brand name when you have those two things together. And it's only Final 5 voting when you have those two things together. There are many places that use just ranked choice voting or instant runoff. And that's what they call that. That's why you hear that in the news. But for Final 5 voting, it has both the multi-winner multi-party 5-winner primary election plus the instant runoff general election. And Danny, I think that's it for me. Go to the next slide. I can't remember if there was one more. Oh yeah, I was just going to mention, people here have hosted a booth at UW River Falls. Many students got a chance to try Final 5 voting. They got a chance to chat with the people there. You see Ann and Josh Wilson from Veterans for Political Innovation in the picture there. And Danny and I and the whole leadership team are committed to expanding our reach. You know, we reach out to as many different people as we can. We believe we've talked to many Democratic voters, and we're just not sure that we've talked to as many Republican voters. So we're brainstorming ways to do that. Danny is getting us a table at a gun show, and we believe that that is a good way to reach out, put ourselves in front of many Republican voters, and expand our reach. I like to say, you cannot bridge the divide if you're just speaking into the mirror. And so that's what we're trying to do, is expand our reach. Danny, I bet that's it for me.
Yes, thank you, Bob. And also thank you to Wendy for looking into those gun shows for us, since that was very useful. And we are on the waiting list as well as registered for a couple of them starting in January and then into February. So we're very excited to have the opportunity to go there. So we will get into talking about the 2022 midterms now. So we're talking about 3 states in particular, and Wisconsin is actually, despite it being our home state, is actually probably the least relevant state in this discussion. Wisconsin was a state where we saw largely that incumbents won across the state. So that means there was no major shift that we either have to worry about possibly hurting Final Five voting or rejoice about helping Final Five voting. Largely, the outlook in Wisconsin has remained the same, and incumbents won across the state. Alaska is a very interesting and relevant case since it is the first instance of Final Four voting being used in multiple statewide elections. So Alaska did have a Final Four voting election in August for their special election, but this was the first time where they really got to run all the elections that they had planned to run in the Final Four voting system. And for all intents and purposes, Final Four voting is the same as Final Five voting, just with one fewer person making it to the general election. So we will be touching on Alaska. We will also be touching on Nevada. Nevada is important because they are on the path to passing Final Five voting in the state. Ballot Measure 3, which was the ballot measure to pass Final Five voting, passed its first vote, 53% to 47%. It will have to go up for another vote in 2024 to be passed entirely, since it is a constitutional amendment in the state of Nevada. But that is very encouraging news for sure to see that movement is being made across the nation as well. So we will go on to the next slide and talk about Alaska. So Alaska uses Final Four voting in federal and state elections. So unlike Wisconsin, where we are just trying at first to get this passed in federal congressional elections, Alaska uses this for statewide elected offices and their federal congressional offices. So we saw that Mary Peltola won the House of Representatives election. Lisa Murkowski, a Republican, won the Senate election, and Mike Dunleavy won the governorship. Those were all incumbents in their seats, and there were also many other elections going on throughout Alaska in those statewide legislature races that saw Republicans who had lost their seats in 2020 running and winning their seats back after being primaried out in 2020. So we can go on to the next slide, which is about the Alaska House election. So this is one of the most newsworthy elections that we have seen come out of Final Four voting so far. So Mary Peltola in August was able to win the seat in the House of Representatives in a special election after the passing of Don Young while he was in office. She won that seat in August and then obviously ran again to get a full term in this November midterm election. So in this election, we saw that Mary Peltola greatly expanded her support, especially in the first round. In August, she only got 39.7% in the first round, still more than her opponents, but not as much as she got this time. This time she got 48.8% in the first round of voting. So after that first round in August, she was eventually able to win the final round of voting. She also won in the final round of voting this time around. So in that final round of tabulation this time, she won with 54.9% of the vote to Sarah Palin's 45.1% of the vote. We can go on to the next slide to talk about why she won. So Sarah Palin, frankly, was not a super popular candidate in the state of Alaska and would have lost head-to-head to Peltola, it should say, without Final Four voting. So that is a very important thing to remember, that this ultimately came down to Palin and Peltola still won. So Palin was not popular enough to be able to beat Peltola. And that is in part because enough Begich supporters, who was the second Republican on the ballot, enough Begich supporters chose Mary Peltola over Palin as their next choice, and that put her over 50%. The majority of Nick Begich supporters did go to Sarah Palin, but enough of them were switched their vote to Mary Peltola as their second choice, and that eventually made her capable of winning. So what this means is that Mary Peltola was able to win with Final Four voting, but she did not win because of Final Four voting. She would have won this election if it were a traditional race between her and Sarah Palin. We know that because Mary Peltola was ahead in every round of voting. So if it had just been between her and Sarah Palin, she would have won that election. Now we can go on to the Alaska Senate election. In this election, we saw a Republican, Lisa Murkowski, win her third term in the final round of tabulation, and she was up against Kelly Shibaka as her most primary, like her most threatening opponent to her seat. So Kelly Shibaka, another Republican, was able to get within a few percentage points of beating her, but ultimately in that final round of tabulation, Lisa Murkowski won 53.7% of the vote and was able to secure a third term in that final round. So in the governor's election, which we can go on to, we also saw that Mike Dunleavy, another Republican who is further to the right than Lisa Murkowski, was also able to win, and he won very easily in the first round. So we're seeing throughout these significant races a moderate Democrat, moderate Republican, and a pretty conservative Trump-endorsed Republican all winning with this Final Four voting system. So that tells us that many of these people across the political spectrum can be aided and helped by political or by Final Four voting, or at least they won't be hurt by Final Four voting, since people all across the spectrum are really winning in Alaska. So we can go on to our takeaways. One of those I really just said right there is that moderate Democrats, moderate Republicans, and conservative Republicans won in significant statewide elections. And that all of those statewide elections that I just covered were won by the person who led after the first round. So if we take it most simply in a black and white terms, that means that those people very likely would have won in the traditional system as well, but that they were able to prove that they did have a majority of support of the electorate compared to all of their opponents. So we can go on to some responses to concerns that are brought up as a result of the Alaska elections. So the fact that Mary Peltola has won this seat has caused some consternation in Republican circles, and that is somewhat understandable when you look at it just with sort of a quick glance, right? This seat was held by a Republican for 50 years, but that seat was held by one Republican for 50 years. It's not as if it was a seat that was held by 20 or so Republicans all for 50 years, and then it was immediately flipped to a Democrat as a result of Final Four voting being put into place. So, like I said earlier, Peltola didn't win because of Final Four voting. She won with Final Four voting. She would have won in the traditional system as well. And Alaska actually has a pretty strong history of bipartisanship, despite the fact that that seat was held by Don Young for 50 years. Alaska has a very strong history of electing independents, Democrats, and Republicans throughout the state and having coalitions of Democrats and Republicans working together. It is also important to make it clear that these Alaskan voters chose 3 people in statewide elections from across the political spectrum. It didn't just help one party. This is something that is very important since we need to dissuade any fear that this is some ploy to get Democrats or Republicans elected. That's not the case. This system got us results that likely would have been seen in the traditional system, but what it helped to do was make sure that we know for certain a majority of people in Alaska supported those candidates. And then the Don Young factor down here is something that I touched on a little bit ago, which is that Don Young held that House seat in the state of Alaska for 50 years. And his holding of that seat does not mean that Alaska was a predominantly Republican state for that entire time. What it really means is that he was a popular and well-liked incumbent. And we're seeing now that Mary Peltola is becoming a popular and well-liked incumbent. So that is all very important. And I want everyone to remember to try to be understanding when you're talking to people who are concerned about putting Final Five voting in place. You can think if you're a Democratic voter, for example, how would you feel if a single Democrat that you were in, held a seat in a congressional district that you were in for 50 years, and then a new system was put in place in a Republican one? You might be a little trepidatious about that system too. So try to be understanding. And if you are patient with the person and you explain these important factors, then it will be a lot easier for them to understand and realize that this system did not hand Mary Peltola the win. It was Sarah Palin's unpopularity that really handed Mary Peltola the win, as well as Mary Peltola's popularity. So we can go on to the next slide where we will talk about the Nevada election. So the Nevada election, like I said, is a very important election that is very much on the track of bringing us Final Five voting to the state of Nevada. So they passed the ballot measure 3 to allow for Final Five voting 53% to 47%. Like I said, they will have to pass it again in 2024 for it to be enacted in the 2026 midterm elections. So it will take them a while, but the fact that it passed that first vote is very encouraging, and it shows that they have a very good chance to pass it again in 2024. So how did they do this in Nevada? They made sure to have broad appeal across the political spectrum. This is not to say that you're going to get 80% or 90% of people to all agree and unanimously say we need to have Final Five voting. It's to say that they were able to grab some independents, some Democrats, some Republicans, as well as people who feel themselves to be politically disenfranchised. And this is very important because we have talked to people at county fairs and house parties, county fairs in particular, who have told us that they don't vote because they feel like their voice is not being heard. And it's important to make it clear that in Final Five voting, you have more of a chance for your voice to be heard. If you are an independent, you will be able to vote for an independent and see the true amount of support for that candidate that there is. Or if you're a libertarian or a Green Party voter, you can vote for that party and see the true amount of support that they have, since there's no such thing as the spoiler effect anymore. So another important thing is to point out the party primary problem. So party primaries are something that were put into place, several decades ago, and were actually a pretty significant improvement at the time, since it gave more people more of a voice in the electoral process. Prior to party primaries being put into place, it was largely party officials who chose who the candidates would be on the ballot in November. But the primaries fixed that problem and gave the voice to the voters. However, what we see today is that only about 10 to 25% of people show up for that party primary, and there is still great improvement to be made. So if we disincentivize the party primary and make it so 5 people advance from the party primary onto the ballot in November, that will mean that the November election is the election that is much more important than the August election. The November election will be where 60 or 70% of the voters, depending on the election, will turn out, whereas August is where only 10 or 25% of voters turn out. And since so many of our House seats are decided by that party primary due to those seats never switching parties, that means that the party primary has way too much power behind it. So those are some important things to learn from Nevada. There are also a couple differences between Wisconsin and Nevada that are important to remember as well. Nevada obviously is a ballot measure state, so they were able to get this on the ballot and pass the vote by popular vote, whereas in Wisconsin, it's not so simple as doing that. In some ways, it is easier in our system, and in some ways, it is harder in our system, right? We have to get the legislators to agree to it, but we don't have to hold 2 successive votes like Nevada has to do. But that is an important differentiation to make, is that Nevada is a ballot measure state, whereas in Wisconsin, we need to make sure that we are getting the legislators on board with passing final 5 voting. Nevada also uses closed primaries. So that is important to remember. One slide back, please, Janelle. That's important to remember since, and I see someone has their hand up. I'll get to you in just a second. That's important to remember since in Nevada, you have to either register as a Republican or a Democrat in order to vote in the Republican or Democratic primaries. In Wisconsin, anyone can vote in whichever primary you want to. You don't have to be registered as a Republican or a Democrat. So that meant that there were a lot of independents in Nevada who felt like they were very disenfranchised by the system and felt like they weren't having their voice be heard and having the opportunity to vote in that primary. So that is also an important differentiation. It does not change the fact that there is still a significant problem with party primaries in the state of Wisconsin and in every state across the nation. And who is it that has their hand up right now?
It's me,
It's
Lorraine.
Lorraine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lorraine, what do you have?
Well, the Wisconsin legislature, as I understand it, the Wisconsin legislature needs to allow us to vote. But it takes 2 elections in Wisconsin to change the Constitution, just like apparently in Nevada, it takes 2 elections also.
Yes, but I'm not sure. I don't think in Wisconsin it would require the same constitutional change where it wouldn't, if we pass it on a legislature level in Wisconsin, then it would be passed. They can also pass it in Wisconsin to the extent that voters would vote on it. And at that point, we would have to vote on it as a population. But our main track, our plan A, is to have the legislature pass it, so we do not have to vote on it as a population. Plan B is to have that referendum on the ballot.
Okay, if it does get on the ballot as a referendum, I believe to change the Constitution, it has to have two votes, with 2 votes saying that the population wants it.
I think correct me if I'm wrong, but in Wisconsin, it's if you want to pass a constitutional amendment, you need the legislature to pass it in 2 separate legislative sessions. So that's the similarity, but the people can't do 2 votes. It has to be the legislators.
Well, the legislature, as I understand it, has to allow it to happen. But, when they've tried to change the Constitution before, they have to do it twice. They have to have it voted on twice to be able to change our Constitution in Wisconsin.
Correct.
I don't know, George Penn, do you know the details on that? George, are you still here?
Oh, there you go. Thank you, Maureen, for telling me my mic was off. Yeah, so we, like Nevada, we have a 2-cycle changing the Constitution, but the people don't have any power in it. They can't force anything. So the legislators have the ability to change it, but they have to do it in 2 voting cycles, pass it. And that's how, some of you that were around about 5 years ago or some, maybe 8 or something, the Republicans passed the constitutional change related to the budget to make sure that that they couldn't take any money out of the general funds for certain things. Or they could take money out of general funds for certain things, but not out of the transportation fund. And because they have a lot of lobbying money from the transportation fund. I have to go back and affirm that to myself. But point is, yes, ours is like Nevada, if that's the same that Danny said.
So just
Bob, there you go. You can go, Bob.
So I hope I'm not adding to the confusion. Just to summarize it, just in case it was unclear to anyone, if this required a constitutional amendment, then yes, it would have to go through twice, but it does not. Our primary path just requires standard legislation, so meaning go through once. And as both Danny and Lorene were alluding to, if our proposed method, if our target method does not work, we'll regroup and we'll look for, we have in mind other methods that may require, more work. But a key is, Lorene is correct that yes, a constitutional amendment has to go through twice, but this final five voting measure can be enacted just with standard legislation.
Yes, thank you, Bob, for that clarification. So we will go on to the next slide, talking about the impact of Alaska and Nevada. So the impact of Alaska is that there is growing concern in conservative circles about the possibility of passing final five voting. And that is for the reasons that I outlined before. Just the optics of having Mary Peltola win a seat that was held by a Republican for 50 years makes it look like this is either some ploy to get Democrats elected. And if it's not a ploy, then it still could make it look like it helps Democrats. Like I said, that is not the case. Mary Peltola likely would have won this election without final five voting over Sarah Palin. But just the optics of having her win that election is a little bit unfriendly when it comes to partisan politics, and it's for understandable reasons. However, in Nevada, it is more encouraging news, and it shows that there is growing momentum throughout the nation to pass final five voting. So this is a growing movement. Final five voting is something that has only been around for a few years. Ranked choice voting has obviously been around for several decades, 100+ years even, but final five voting as we know it and as we are trying to pass it in Wisconsin has only been around for a handful of years. And this is something that is growing momentum across the nation, and it is growing momentum across Wisconsin as well. So those are important things to keep in mind as we're going into the next legislative session and as we are going into 2023. How did Nevada get to the point of having final five on the ballot? I'm not exactly sure what their requirements are, but I would imagine it was get a certain number of signatures and then it was on the ballot. So that is not something that we are able to rely upon in Wisconsin due to us not being a ballot measure state. So we will open the floor for questions now. Any questions that anyone has are welcome, and we will do our best to answer them. I know somebody must have a question they're thinking of.
Yeah, I was looking for the hand to put up, but I couldn't find it quick enough, so I just thought.
Yeah, go right ahead.
This is George again. So there's been, in Wisconsin, there's been change of, not much change, and maybe you know how much, Dan, I don't, change of seats and who's in the seats there. Have any of those changes impacted the strategy that you and the Final Five Voters First Wisconsin are working on there?
I wouldn't say that the main thing, the main seat change that has affected the strategy is just the retirement of Dale Kuyenga, who was the co-author of the bill alongside Jeff Smith.
Oh,
and as I understand it, he was just ready to retire from politics. And ever since then, they have run into some roadblocks in getting another Republican co-sponsor for the bill, which has provided some difficulties in getting this onto the vote in January, which was the earliest possible time. It will likely be a few months down the line now due to the difficulties of getting another Republican co-author.
Thank you. I have to hope that Sarah and Catherine Gale and the Yangs can get a new sponsor.
And I do believe they have gotten a few co-sponsors in the assembly, Republican co-sponsors in the assembly that were not co-sponsoring last legislative session, but they are still working on getting that second co-author who is a Republican in the Senate. Lorene.
You're going to be coming to Menominee in January 14, Danny. And what I need to know, when you come, is how we as a group, because we have a community conversations, how we as a group can work, to help you. Because I really want you to try to educate the people, on what we can do. Is it just going to be calling representatives, or do you have some other strategy?
Yeah, our main strategy for now is house parties, and I'll let Bob touch on this too. Our main strategy for now is the house party. So essentially what your community conversation is just spreading the word through house parties and community conversations. And eventually it will be bringing us to calling legislators sometime in 2023 to apply that legislative pressure. Bob, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I did. Lorraine's question fits in perfectly with things that we are trying to make happen. We would like to be speaking to more VFWs and American Legions and other organizations. I've reached out, and I've got one Rotary Club on our schedule, but it is slow going to get on these organizational schedules. So we could really use help, literally, from anyone on this line right now that has connections to any community organization. We would love to work with you and try to get in and have one of these presentations, one of these demonstration elections for that community organization.
Okay, so we can help you best if we try to find, other areas like in Menominee that might be interested in letting you educate their membership.
That's exactly right. If any of your, Lorraine, your community conversations, I don't know if you have a regular group and so you know them very well, but if any of them happen to be members of almost any type of social club, we think that would be a good opportunity to propagate this.
The churches?
Churches would be great.
Mm-hmm. Well, we could probably put it up to the people that come. They're generally more progressives that come to this. But, they may have ideas also to help you out, where else you could look in Dunn County, to the Rod and Gun Club. Maybe that might be a good place to go. That would get a lot of Republicans.
Yeah, Lorraine, you are 100% right. And don't take my comments earlier that we are looking for innovative ways to reach out to Republicans. We still want to talk to many, many Democratic voting groups. So there's no issue at all there. We would love to talk to those groups.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one final comment on that. In addition to just referrals to a group, I'll use Linda Vivoda Sadi as an example. So she was our first house party host beyond my initial attempts in my neighborhood. And I checked in with Linda maybe 2 months ago and asked if she'd be willing to help me on a special project. That was this community ed things. And so having someone that can not just identify groups, but can actually reach out to those groups. And sometimes I bet there are 2 or 3 or more back and forth emails. If someone could take that on for us too, it would really help us. And it would be it might not seem like much, but it would be such a great volunteer service to the organization and to, by extension, to everyone in our connected community.
My husband just suggested that we might reach out to Rotary, because that has a lot of Republicans in Rotary.
Lorraine, you're right. And I find getting onto the Rotary schedule is difficult. So if Mike is on Rotary, or he has a close friend that is, what I really need is someone there speaking to pull us onto that schedule, getting us on there.
Okay, we also have senior citizens too that are pretty active. That might be another good one for Menominee. Yep. And Mike has a lot of connections with senior citizens, and we know some people that are in Rotary, so we could, see if they would be interested in doing that.
Yes. So Lorraine, to sum up, you asked a key question. You know, we gather a group of people together. What can they do? And it's really comes down to, one, they can volunteer to host house parties, and then we get connected to their network. Two, they can think of the social organizations, the community organizations that they are part of, and they can advocate for us. They can go to those people and get us on their scheduler.
Okay, we can work on that in January then when you come.
I love it.
Okay.
Any other questions that anyone has? Anything in chat? Doesn't look like it.
Is there anybody on the line that is planning to host a house party and is, you know, that we have not nailed down a date? You know, I see some people that I think maybe, and I'm just not, as I often trade many different calls and emails to try to find times we can talk. Is there anybody on the line now that is planning to host a house party? Is there anybody on the line that would like to host a house party?
I know we've been talking about it back and forth, Bob. And so some of the thought was to do something at church with the group there, or to do something here. So we could probably get that figured out.
Jean, I've got your contact information. I will reach out and we'll figure out how we're going to do that.
That sounds great, Bob.
Thank you.
And Alexi, I see you aren't hosting anything big indoors right now. That is completely understandable. Hopefully, even when it warms up a little in the spring or summer, outdoor locations will be more viable as well. So long as we're still doing house parties by then.
Alexi, I'll ask Danny instead. You've got Alexi's contact information so that we can, okay, good.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right, great. Any final questions anyone has?
I don't have a question, but I think I want to just put some emphasis on something because there's been a lot of conversation about how Final Five does not help one party or another. I kind of want to put some emphasis on, well, it actually helps both parties because it helps put sanity back into politics, because with Final Five, the candidates have to appeal to a much broader range of voters. And so it's in their best interest to not have blinders on, not have such a narrow political ideology that only supports just a minority of people on either side. At least in how they think about it. So we need to knit the country back together, because united we stand, divided we fall. And we're so vulnerable and weak when we're at each other's throats politically, as opposed to being able to find common ground and rediscover a common set of actual facts on the ground. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Yes, that's very good comment. Alexi, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, Wendy. I really hate to be a contrarian on this, but I think you might be mistaken. And the feedback that I got, and the feedback that I got comes from Democrats in Dane County down in Madison. And they were directly afraid that people would go and cast their first ballot for third parties, which is something that Final Five will gloriously allow us to do without completely hosing the candidates that we like, but like a little bit less. And so I worry that for major parties, they really enjoy the fact that we don't have a choice but to vote strategically for their endorsed candidates right now. And I think one of the great things about Final Five is that we won't have to do that quite as much anymore. But I think that particular argument is going to get a different reaction than you might expect.
Do you mind, Alexi? I have a comment, just a couple of things as people consider your comments upon Wendy's, some things I want them to consider. There's a group of people in this country that everyone hates, and that's incumbent politicians. This is actually useful for incumbent politicians in that, you know, they can't win an election in November if they never vote with their party, but they can make, when the issue is big enough, at the very least, this is an innovation that can assure them they will get to be able to speak to their whole district. And that is, it frees them up a little bit. And I bet those incumbent politicians in both parties greatly appreciate this, which is not to say that you are wrong. They will, you know, they won't be thrilled. You know, Democrats won't be thrilled to lose some #1 votes to Greens. Republicans won't be thrilled to lose some #1 votes to Libertarians, but there's something in it for them to help compensate for that. So I don't dispute what you're saying. You talk to them, and I believe you, the responses you got. But with the right, you know, message, incumbents will see that there's something in it for them too.
Yeah, and you're right, Bob. I should clarify real quick. I'm sorry, Lorraine. Real quick. The people that I talked to were party officials. They were not candidates.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, is that Mike?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. I think you're going to find the people who try and control the parties will not be for this, but the candidates who control the legislature are more apt to be for it. And I think Alexi was right, and you're right. In the end, it's the legislature you got to convince, and they may have the most to gain.
I think that everything that's been said, I believe, is correct, and it just shows that you kind of have to pull all this together, and there's a balance of factors going for us and against us. That's right.
Yes, thank you all for the discussion. I think a lot of very pertinent things were said. Very insightful things. Any other questions or comments people have?
One quick comment. I am hoping to talk with the St. Croix Republican Party leadership. And so I'll find out, I'll report back to you soon, whether I find the same thing that Alexi reported.
Sounds great. Thank you. And I see, Alexi, you have your hand up. Is that from earlier? Or is that
Nope,
new comment?
this is new. I
Okay.
just wanted to highlight what Craig posted in the chat. And I sort of have a question about that. I have no idea if this would work, but would it be helpful to present like, you know, showing folks on the right wing that folks on the left wing, like some of folks on the left wing, aren't happy with the idea, like sort of an enemy of my enemy might be my friend sort of thing, or do you think we really need to find conservatives who actually support it?
I think both are useful, but I do think it is useful to point out, like in Nevada, for example, there were many establishment Democrats who were very, very opposed to passing this in Nevada. And Illinois is another example where there's a Final Five voting, small movement there, hasn't quite gotten a ton of steam yet, but there's a small movement there that is being pushed a lot by more Republicans and more conservatives because of dissatisfaction with the Democratic establishment in that state. And I think that it is both things are very useful, but I think you're absolutely right, Alexi, that it is also useful to point out some Democratic people who could potentially be opposed to this. And I think I am going to, does anyone else have any other questions? Janelle has some news to share with us as well.
I might just point out that in response to all of that, another route to take is to just say that this is good for the people. It's not good for politicians. It's not good for party bosses, and it's good for the people. And as soon as we start mentioning like Republican or conservative, progressive, like we all go into our kind of like our what am I the word I'm trying to think of? We go into our
bubble.
Our bubble or our fight or flight kind of, you know, we're already pitting ourselves against other people. So rather than pitting one party against the other, I think there could be a lot of productivity in pitting people against party bosses, people against greedy politicians. You know, we the people are together on this against the people that don't want to give up their power and listen to us, the people. Cool. Well, if there's nothing else on that, I'll move on to my stuff. It's really nice to be with all of you here tonight, and I've just got a few little announcements to make. The first thing is that Grow Action is affiliated with Grow, so there are two affiliated organizations, and this in January, Grow is hosting a grassroots school. So just as tonight, we've been talking a lot about house parties and building relationships, and all of that is to build power amongst us, the people, to have a lot of influence with the legislators. And so it's a really strategic step to win in the court of public opinion and build the power together so that we actually have influence when we call legislators, and it's not just 5 people calling a legislator and nothing happens. So the grassroots school really looks at how can we build relationships? How can we strategically design a campaign to win? And what's really fun about it is that look back at other examples through history, how have other people done it? And what are the tools that can really help us apply our energy as efficiently as possible to get results? And so I encourage anybody who is interested to participate. It's the last week in January. It's 2 evenings on Zoom, and then it's 1 weekend, so a Saturday and a Sunday in person in Menominee, which is pretty centrally located for our Western Wisconsin region. And so we really hope that you'll consider participating, help spread the word. There's a lot of information on our website, and I think Danny will put some in the chat, but our website's just gro-ww.org/GS for grassroots school. There's all the details there, and I encourage you to check it out and share it with anybody else that you think might be interested. And next Thursday, what day, Danny, is the info session?
I think it's Tuesday. I'll check and make sure quick.
At 6:30 p.m. So there's a 1 hour on Zoom. If you want to learn more, if you want to ask questions, Bill Hogseth, who will be co-leading the training with Kate. Used to be Kate Phelps, I think. Used to be Kate Beaton. So you can go to that info session and ask a bunch of questions and find out anything you need to find out. But consider attending. And Maureen, do you have a question?
Yeah, this is the first time I've heard it called grassroots school. We've always referred to it as organizing school in the past, as I remember.
Yeah, it's grassroots school. Yeah.
Okay.
It's the tagline is organize for change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. And along with that, we want everyone, regardless of their financial means, to be able to attend this school. So we're currently in the middle of a fundraiser. to raise $10,000, which is the cost that it is to our organization to run the school. And that way anyone attending can just attend without having to pay anything. So we would love for you to consider making a donation to help fund the grassroots school. And there are 3 individuals from our community, George Penn being one of them, that have donated matching funds. So any donation that you make to this effort will be matched by a donation from the community. So really good opportunity to make your dollars go a really long way. And really, this is the kind of training that helps set our community up to have lots of leaders and be able to really build the power that we need to create change. It's not, we don't get instant results, as we've talked about tonight. We don't even know exactly when this bill is going to be introduced, and we're working really hard to build a lot of power so that this can get passed in Wisconsin. So it's not like creating this change is immediate, but getting trained and working together as a community, grassroots, and building leaders is really the key to having transformational change in our area. And Maureen, do you have another question?
No.
Oh, no. Okay. I thought I saw your hand. Cool. So you can go to Grow website, and Danny, maybe you'll put that in the chat too. You can give with your credit card. If you don't want to give by credit card, you can also write a check or give through your charitable trust. And thank you for everyone who's able to participate with that and make the grassroots school free for everyone.
Really so good.
The last thing I want to bring up is on December 12th, we're hosting an event called Democracy in Wisconsin, looking ahead to 2023. As you know, there have been some assaults on our democracy. We've been fighting for fair maps, now Final 5 voting. We really want, what we want is everyone's voice to be able to be heard in Wisconsin, and we want our votes to have an impact. And so with an eye ahead to next year with the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, we just want to make sure that our values of fairness, freedom, integrity are upheld. So as we think about what we'll be able to do to impact that race, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race in the spring, we want to kick off kind of our thinking about that as a community with this event. And we'll have 3 fantastic speakers. Angeli Bosson is Civic Engagement Director, Wisconsin Conservation Voters. Matt Rothschild, very energetic speaker, is the Executive Director of Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. And for those of you who are a fan of Matt, he is retiring this summer, so there aren't going to be that many more options to hear him speak. And then Dan Kaufman, who's a journalist and wrote The Fall of Wisconsin. So I think it'll be a really rich, interesting conversation, and will help set us up to thinking about how our organization could have an impact leading up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. I invite you to join. I invite you to help us spread the word on that. And that's it for me, Danny. Thanks everyone for listening.
Yes, and I dropped those 3 links in the chat there. So if you want to either donate, learn more about Grassroots School, or register for that Supreme Court race Zoom call, all those links are in the chat for you. So I will give you all a couple minutes to copy those links before we end the meeting here today. But I'd like to give us an opportunity while you guys are opening any links that you'd like to open to see if anyone has any takeaways from our meeting today. George, do you have your hand up?
Well, I have my hand up before you made that request, so I don't have any
Okay.
takeaways, but I have a question for
Yep.
Janelle. Janelle, while you were talking, I quickly went on your site and I couldn't find the link to get to that December 12th thing. How do people sign up for that?
If it's not up yet, it'll be up super soon, but Danny just put the, if you're able to click in the notes in the chat, Danny put that link
That's fine. So it's brand new and he'll get it up for us to click on. Thanks.
It's a real difficult link. It's got
Okay.
lots of crazy letters
Yeah,
and numbers.
thank you.
Are you all, were you all able to open the link that I put in chat for that every action Democracy in Wisconsin Zoom call?
I'm able to.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And
Yeah, I
it'll
got
go
it
out.
too.
It'll go out in a targeted email. All of you are on our mailing list, so you'll get an email from probably Bill saying, hey, join us for Democracy in Wisconsin. So you'll get an email as well.
Good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any takeaways from our meeting today or final questions, comments?
I have a takeaway.
Yep.
This had some of the best back and forth discussion following the presentation. I love the fact that people are paying attention and share these things, and we can have kind of an open discussion about it. That was great.
I agree.
Yes, thank you. I agree with that as well. I think we had some fruitful discussion for sure and a lot of thoughtful insight. So I appreciated that a lot from everyone. So I will let you all go. Thank you all for joining us today. And I hope you're able to register for that Zoom call on the 12th, possibly attend Grassroots School and donate if you're able, since that would all be very much appreciated. So thank you all for joining us today. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and rest of your week.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Take care.